go to our special presentation. The first administrative duty that we have this morning is to establish the rules under which we will operate, and they're very similar to the rules that we had this past year, with 3 additionals, and those are primarily the operation during the telecast over the internet. And that is that during the presentations, no one from the audience will be allowed in front of the banister. The request to speak mics are listed in front of you, and so any member of the committee can request to speak, and I just turn them on, and people in the audience and people out on the webcast will be able to hear what's going on. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, and Representative Barbara Reese, glad to have you with us this morning. As we get further along in the session, it becomes more and more difficult to have a quorum. And one change to the rules is to lower the quorum to 4 members. As we see here, we have 6 today, and that's a little difficult. I do not expect to have any bills before the committee for another 14 days. There are some working in the Senate and some that are being drafted. So for today and probably the next 2 weeks, we will have special guests. Had a chance to look over the proposed rules changes, I would entertain a motion.
It's in order. I move the committee to adopt these rules as presented. Turn the mics on so they hear them on that.
The chairman's okay.
You're in there. Mr. Chairman, if the motion's in order, I move that we do accept the rules as presented and adopt them for the committee for the year 2006.
Is there a second?
Second. Maybe second, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
The rules are adopted. This morning we have some special guests. We have Mr. Jim Flowers, who's Special Assistant to the Chief Information Officer, University System of Georgia. Jim, has that changed? Same title. And we have Marlette Hazlett. Where's Marlette? Marlette, Jim didn't fill me on what your title was, but I look forward to meeting you after this session, or after this committee meeting. And this morning we are very privileged to have C. Michael Cassidy, President and CEO of the Georgia Research Alliance and a 2006 winner of the Biomedical Industry Growth Award. Mike, it's great to have you with us today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Jesse, would you give Mike a hand in passing out the handout, please? Ladies and gentlemen of the audience, due to a glitch, once again, you will not see the presentation on the overhead.
Mr. Chairman, thanks very much for having me here this morning. I want all the committee members to know that the Chairman's taken a genuine interest in the growth of science and technology opportunities in the state. We had the pleasure of attending several meetings together this past year, and Amos, I really appreciate you coming to our Southern Innovation Summit, and we hosted a large national conference here the last part of 2005, the State Science and Technology Institute, which is an international organization that represents the the folks that do the kinds of things that we do at the Research Alliance, but all across the country and even some international locations. And we were proud to host their 9th annual conference in Atlanta, and the chairman spent some time with us looking at some policy issues. It's early this morning. I know you all have a lot to do. I brought a pretty fat deck of information to walk you through, so I'm going to move pretty quickly. What I'd like to do is provide for you some background about the Georgia Research Alliance. I know some of you are very familiar with what we've been doing the past 15 years. Our information might be newer to others of you, but stop me at any point if there's questions. I'll focus on a little bit of the origins of the organization, the kinds of things that we do to help develop the economy of the state, and then I've got a section in here that really addresses your return on investment. So if you work from this package that I brought with me and just move right into the second page, and let me help you to understand where the Georgia Research Alliance fits in the fabric of economic development in the state of Georgia. We walk sort of a fine line between higher education and economic development. Our outcomes, the results of what we do, are measured through metrics associated with economic development, but the inputs are very specifically investments in higher education. So I'll explain that as I go forward. But if you think about all the things that happen within the state with regard to economic development, it really comes down to 3 kinds of issues. There's drivers on the left-hand column, things that happen in the state that drive economic development. Big recruitments of industry and headquarters and distribution centers, or big events coming to town like the Super Bowl. There's things the state does to create an environment for those things to happen, like its tax policy or workforce training or infrastructure, roads and sewers and the like. And then there's a number of different metrics that measure those kinds of results. Numbers of new locations of industry announcing in the state, or capital investment that industry makes when it comes to the state, or jobs that are created as a result, an impact on gross state product. The Georgia Research Alliance sort of works across each of those, but there's, again, a very fine line. There's just a piece of all of that that we're pushing on, and our special focus is really about new ideas. So in terms of drivers, it's the new ideas that come out of our research universities that we're trying to capitalize on and leverage for the development of new businesses, new jobs, new opportunities in the state. We measure our outcomes through things like more PhDs being conferred from our research universities because talent is so important as a driver for the industry, or patents that are granted to the universities as a proxy for the viability of the ideas that are being generated in the universities. And of course, the research funding that the schools attract in is very, very important, because that is where the ideas are developed through the scale-up of research on each of the campuses. So we fit within the state's economic development strategy, but there are only a few areas that we're focused on. Now, on the next page, this is not a mission statement for the organization, but it really captures what we're about. The Research Alliance really represents a very, very clever strategy to create a set of conditions in the state that will enable economic growth. Now, I can't stand here this morning and tell you that it is our responsibility to create jobs in the state. That's not what we do. But we are creating an environment or a set of conditions where industry can take advantage of new opportunities coming out of our research universities, build companies, create jobs, build wealth, and impact the growth of the economy. So we're the group that sort of sits in the middle of the universities, the business sector, and government, and we bring those 3 pieces together and focus that energy on creating these conditions in the state. And when we get to return on investment, I'll show you how that's worked. There are 6, on the next page, there are 6 universities that make up the Georgia Research Alliance. All familiar names to you. Interestingly, 4 of them are public universities. They're part of our university system. They're governed by the Board of Regents. 2 of them, Emory and Clark Atlanta University, are private universities. So 4 public, 2 private. 3 of the names very well established in the world. 3 of them somewhat up-and-comers. It's a good number. It's a good mix. Sort of some common threads. These are the only 6 universities in the state that award a PhD in the sciences and engineering. And these are the 6 schools in our state that do a disproportionate share of federally funded research. These would be the 6 that would be right up at the top of the list. And then there's a long gap until we get down to other schools. But from a Board of Regents standpoint, the 4 schools in here that are Regents institutions are, by definition and by mission, research universities. And the other 2, through their own governance, There are a number of different standards bodies, like the Carnegie Commission on Higher Education, that would classify these schools as research-intensive or research-extensive universities. Again, a disproportionate share of the research activity in the state. Now, on the next page, let me give you a little bit of the background on the organization itself. We think the Research Alliance is very, very distinctive. It's a very different kind of a program if you look across the 50 states. Of course, we have a mission of seeding statewide economic growth. You can look in our annual report and turn to page 31, and you'll see a map here with all the pinpoints across the state. The research results from these universities, we're making sure that those results are projected throughout the state. So all these little pinpoints across the state are companies that we've been able to link up with our research universities so that they can take advantage of the new discoveries and the new growth in the universities, but apply them to developments in their business. The leadership, or the Board of Trustees of the Georgia Research Alliance, very, very high level, very strong Board of Trustees. The Georgia Research Alliance is an independent entity. We're a not-for-profit corporation guided by an independent Board of Trustees that's made up of the presidents of those 6 research universities that I told you about, joined by 15 corporate executives, most of them CEOs. Our chairman today is David Ratcliffe. Former chairmen were Jim Blanchard from Synovus in Columbus, Dwayne Ackerman from Bell South, Bill Jones down at the Sea Island Company. Our 2 founding trustees were Tom Cousins and Larry Gellerstadt Jr. Tom is still very active on our board. As you know, Larry passed away a couple of years, but was very much instrumental in creating the organization. GRA was created in 1990, just a little bit before, actually, Governor Miller was elected. The business leadership had decided that Georgia needed to sort of go in a new direction to figure out how to capitalize on these great research universities that we had. And they put this organization together and decided that it should be run more from a nonprofit, private perspective so that it could be independent, it could bring focus to our investments. And when Governor Miller was elected, they invited the governor to bring the state into the partnership as a leader and as an investor. And so we've enjoyed a very, very unique relationship between a not-for-profit corporation, state government, and the corporate sector now for 15 years. Because we have this independence, we can bring a lot of objectivity. I'd like you to think of us as an honest broker to help you all and guide you all in making decisions about where to place investment in our research universities. It's a small number of universities we're dealing with, and today really only 2 areas of focus, biotechnology and broadband telecommunications. These are areas that we continue to evaluate for opportunities for building industry and enterprise in the state. We can talk about budget items later if you're interested, and there is a budget item in the governor's recommendation that would help us to establish an energy research initiative, and we're very excited about that. So as I mentioned, just a small number of technical areas in terms of focus. We're dealing with, on average, anywhere from mid-20s to mid-$30 million per year of state investment. It's a lot of money, I know, but it can only go so far, so it's important to choose areas that we think have opportunity in the state. So if you turn again to the next page, just wanted to, I got one little headline from a newspaper. We try to keep up with what the press is saying across the country. And what I wanted to let you know here is that the Georgia Research Alliance is something that you all can be very, very proud of. I hope the day will come that when you're at the Council of State Legislatures, you'll hear more talked about it. But as a public policy initiative, I'm proud to say that the Georgia Research Alliance is now looked at as one of the best practices in the country. This was from the Montgomery Advertiser, and it's putting Georgia on the same plane as what we know as the Research Triangle over in North Carolina. So we're now in that mix of conversation. When people talk about places like Silicon Valley or Route 128 up in Boston and Research Triangle Park in North Carolina, now they're starting to talk about Georgia as well. And that's the kind of image that we need when our economic developers are out trying to recruit high-tech industry to our state. On the next page, certainly you all know innovation is the hot topic. You pick up anything in the popular press or any bestseller book. The world is flat, all these different titles that are out now. It's all about innovation. And what I want to talk about is how our program relates to the innovation topic. Most folks have determined that innovation will be driven by 3 things: talent, infrastructure, and investment. And if you think about our portfolio of investment, they really run across those 3. Step to the next page. talent. We bring a lot of focus to putting money around top people. Those of you that are in business, you know that you go out and you find the best people and you bring them into your business and good things happen. And that's what we're doing in the state. With your help as an investor, we have endowed 52 chairs now for what we call our Georgia Research Alliance Eminent Scholars. Now, these are best and brightest in the technical areas that I've told you about. And they are the key component of the success for the Research Alliance. They attract a disproportionate share of the federal funding from the various agencies. They bring the best people with them. Now the best graduate students want to come to Georgia to be around these people. And these folks are wired a little bit differently. I know when I say something like eminent scholar, that might conjure up an image of a guy in a lab coat sitting up in the top of some ivy-covered building that never wants to talk to anybody. But we're looking for folks that do have a little bit different wiring. They're experts in their field, but they're interested in working with industry. Many of our eminent scholars are involved in the formation of new companies. Many of them sit on the boards of new technology companies. Many of them serve as chief scientific officers of new companies. So this is where our emphasis has been, in going after the best and brightest. On the next page, a quick example, an individual named Nikhil Giant. We recruited Nikhil from Bell Labs back in 1996, and we placed him inside a building that we had developed over near Georgia Tech called GCAT, the Georgia Center for Advanced Telecommunications Technology. Nikhil quickly set up what was called the Broadband Institute. He recruited additional scholars, graduate students, and the like, and built an enterprise inside of Georgia Tech to focus on broadband telecommunication. Developed some intellectual property. He patented a new coding technology for video compression. We linked him up with a serial entrepreneur, an individual that had been successful in forming technology companies in Georgia previously. They went out and they raised early stage capital. They built a company. Today that company has attracted more than $17 million of venture capital, mostly from venture firms outside of the state. They employ 55 people today. And the thing that's unique about this is it's a company that fits in Georgia. Too often what we've had happen over the past 20 to 30 years is our universities churn out a technology, perhaps a company is formed, but there's no base, there's no critical mass in our state. So that company winds up going somewhere else. Now, we have a robust telecommunications industry in our state, and EG Technologies fits right in there. So it's most likely that EG Technologies will grow and flourish here in Georgia versus being pulled off somewhere else. As I mentioned, most of their venture capital came from Texas and California. And too often what happens is with those outside the state investments, the investors say, now you'll move the company over here. But this company makes sense here in Georgia. And that's what we're doing, is we're bringing focus to these opportunities that make sense to grow in Georgia. On the next page, quickly about infrastructure, we invest in a lot of research infrastructure, very sophisticated laboratories and equipment across these university campuses. Here's just a listing of some of those laboratories, sort of common threads in each of these. They're very comprehensive, broad and deep in terms of the kind of research that's underway. They're generally multi-institutional. When we make major investments in very expensive equipment, like a $3 million nuclear magnetic resonance imaging system, we expect multiple institutions to use it. We don't expect to buy 3 or 4 of them. There's significant federal funding within each of these centers. The NIH funds what they call centers of excellence. The National Science Foundation funds what they call engineering research centers. These are real plums to have in your state, and we have about 5 of them now. And then each of these involve our eminent scholars, and they provide the leadership to the direction and the vision of these centers. And then finally on the next page, the most exciting piece now of what's going on is commercializing the results of all of this research activity. And I'll be honest with you, it took a good 10 years to really develop a critical mass of research activity in our universities where we could begin to systematically pull out ideas and look at ways of building businesses around it. So about 5 years ago, really, we began to look at that, and we were concerned that not enough of that was happening. We saw a lot of research activity in our universities. We didn't see enough new companies being formed around it. So if you just step to the next page, and you've got a little booklet that I invite you to take a look at sometime today, the Georgia Research Alliance Innovation Fund. The centerpiece of that is what's called Venture Lab. And I want to tell you quickly about some success that we've had with Venture Lab. The idea was to try to link up researchers in the universities, again, with these serial entrepreneurs that knew how to build businesses around technology. Back in about 2002, we decided to go on a scavenger hunt across our universities and find out what was developing in the laboratories. So we assembled a small crew of these folks that we called venture fellows. They were serial entrepreneurs who'd been successful in the past. We identified 150 interesting ideas, most of them science projects, most of them things that the researchers themselves had not thought about filing for a patent or trying to build activity around. 150 different ideas. So we put some funding in place where we could do some market strategies, some intellectual property strategies, in a lot of cases some proof of principle or pilot scale construction of products, and took 40 of those ideas and put them through that process along with about $3 million that you all have provided through appropriations. And out of that came 29 new companies. Most of them have gone into our incubators on the campus, either the ATDC at Georgia Tech or what we call the Georgia Biobusiness Center over at the University of Georgia. And today, already 15 of those 29 have gone on to graduate from the incubator programs. And they've attracted very significant private equity funding, $40 million. And among those companies, there's about 100 employees. Now, that's not a big dent in the workforce of our state, but what I will tell you is that over time, of those 29 companies, there'll be a handful of them that we hope will become very large companies. We'll be proud of them. They'll be major employers, and they'll introduce products into the economy that will say, made in Georgia. And all of this will begin to turn the economy on. Again, these are Georgia companies. These aren't ideas that took up and left to go to California or Singapore or Massachusetts. These are all Georgia companies now. So it took a very deliberate step to begin to make this happen. We've also worked with our universities to do some changes in policies and procedures just to streamline the throughput of moving these ideas. And there are a few budget entries in the governor's recommendation for 07 to address a few other gaps in that process that we've identified. Now, on the next page, let me turn to the return on investment conversation. I know this is what all of you need to be able to talk about with your constituents. What's the state getting in return? We look at this in two different ways. Economic impact, where we have a very direct impact on the impact of the investments, and we have a big responsibility for that. And then there's economic development. As I said earlier, economic development really comes downstream. So all the way to the left, we talk about dollars from the Georgia Research Alliance, which are dollars that you provide, dollars from the universities that come from a variety of sources, including the state, and private dollars. There's been a lot of leverage with key philanthropic foundations that invest alongside the investments that we're making in developing infrastructure in the form of talent and research laboratories. Again, if you're in business, you know that it's all about financing your assets. You put the best people and the best assets in place, and you expect them to generate revenues, and that's our model. With your dollars, we don't fund research. We invest in assets, either in permanent endowments for people or for the equipment in the laboratories to help them do their work. They go on and leverage those investments by becoming more productive and going after grants from the federal government. Those dollars that come into the state, today over $1 billion a year from various funding agencies that are coming into those 6 universities, that has a direct and an immediate impact on the economy. And just turn to the next page. We kind of compare the impact of these 6 research universities to having the CDC in the state, and you all know the impact of the CDC. CDC has a global mission, but they spend a lot of money in Georgia. In fact, they spend about $1.3 billion in Georgia, and our universities spend about $1.1 billion in Georgia doing the same things, employing research scientists, supporting technicians, building facilities, purchasing goods and services. And if you brought an economist in to talk with you this morning, they would talk about multipliers. And when you run these dollars through multipliers, you begin to see the kinds of numbers on the right-hand side. But just remember, you know, the scale and scope of something like the CDC or a major corporation, that's the impact of these 6 universities and the impact of those dollars. Now, I won't stand here and tell you that the Georgia Research Alliance is solely responsible for the growth of research in those 6 universities. But what I can tell you is that in 1990, as the Research Alliance was being formed, our 6 universities did $400 million of externally funded research. This year they'll do $1.1 billion. Now, some of that growth was systemic. agreeably. But you ask any of the presidents of those 6 research universities, and they will tell you that without the help that you've provided, focused through the Research Alliance, it would have been impossible to attain that kind of growth in extramural research funding. Again, the eminent scholars that we're bringing to town, we announced a fellow named Jeff Skolnick back in December, who's coming from the University of Buffalo in New York. He's a specialist in bioinformatics. He's already on the ground. Jeff's bringing 19 colleagues with him, and they're bringing $2 million in federal funding with them. Now, you do this over and over and over again, as we have, and all of a sudden there's a big impact on what's happening. So I do think there is some direct attribution to the investment that you've provided, and we've put our universities on a very steep growth path. And the results of those researches then go into forming new companies. Now, economic development. The market takes care of economic development. The Research Alliance, Department of Economic Development, other economic developers in the state, we're all about trying to create a set of conditions where that can happen. And I've talked to you about the kinds of conditions that we're putting in place in terms of research talent, specialized infrastructure. And this is just a list. The chairman mentioned the Georgia Biomedical Partnership. That's a trade organization in our state that's responsible for representing the biomedical industry. And they just published their annual report for what happened just last year. And these are some of the statistics that came from that group. But right in the middle, it's noted 3 of the 4 top venture-funded deals last year, 3 of the 4 were in biomedical. And I'll tell you, 2 of those 3 companies came right out of our research universities. Now, they're young, and they're raising like $20 to $30 million of venture capital. But step down to the last 2 bullet points at the bottom of the page, Atherogenics and Inhibitex. Now, these are our big success stories to date in the biomedical area. Atherogenics is a company that's commercializing a drug to treat atherosclerosis, hardening of the arteries. They just signed a $1 billion licensing deal with AstraZeneca for the global scale-up development and distribution of that new drug. It's in phase 3 clinical trials. We expect some real good news by the middle of this year. When that happens, there will be a blockbuster drug to address heart disease in the market, and on the label it will say, made in Georgia. And I can tell you that that wouldn't happen without the investments that you've been making through the Georgia Research Alliance, because that science came right out of laboratories that we developed at Emory University back in 1993. That's how long this can take. So we appreciate the patience of the state as a partner in what we're doing. Inhibitex, similar story. Company that was recruited to Georgia when it was just 1 scientist. We put it in one of our incubators and helped to grow it up. We hope that within the next year they'll have a drug on the marketplace that addresses staph infection in premature babies. And on the label it'll say, made in Georgia. So beyond the dollars and cents kind of impact, we're going to start seeing blockbuster drugs being developed in this state and marketed globally, and we're going to be able to say that that's happening in Georgia. And what I want to help you to understand is a lot of that goes directly back to the investments that you've made through the Research Alliance. So you add all of these things together on the next page, and I'm talking about apples and oranges, and any of you that are economists would slap me around for doing that. But if you take all of these successes we're talking about, here's how we would lay it all out. Over the 15 years that we've been in business, you all have invested $400 million in this initiative. What have we given you in return? 52 top-ranked academic scientists who are now joined by about 200 other colleagues that they've attracted into the state to help them populate their laboratories. More than $1 billion a year of externally funded research flowing into the state. And a lot of other jobs being created just in the universities themselves. And then what happens after that engine gets running? Lots of publications. Publications are a measure of the productivity of the research and the quality of the research. This is world-class, cutting-edge research that's happening in our Georgia universities. And they're generating a whole new talent pool that will be the fuel for the industry that we're working on developing. And then longer term, and it takes a decade, and we're beginning to see the results. But today we can talk about 120 different companies that have their roots back in the investments that you've made through the Research Alliance. We can talk about $500 million of private equity that has flowed into developing those companies that have been created around the science. And we do work closely with the state's Department of Economic Development when they're recruiting larger industry that has a technology intensity to it. And so there's some names of companies that we've participated with there in helping bring them to the state. Finally, let me close with this one last slide from the Hartford Business Journal, and this goes back to what I was explaining before. Image counts for a lot, and here's a northeastern state, and what they're saying is, we would have never thought to look to the South for advice on how to craft an economic development strategy, but today, Georgia is a best practice. And I could show you 10 other articles from last year of other states who've come and tried to figure out how we're doing this. And I don't mind talking to them about it because I don't think any of them can really execute as well as we do. I don't think they have the leadership and the vision and the sort of the progressive nature that our governor and legislature have, and they don't have the business leadership. And as I said earlier, the key to our organization is the strong business leadership that provides a vision and focus to what we're doing. So there's a lot of states trying to copy what we're doing. Frankly, they need to. The nation needs to do more of what we're doing here in Georgia. But today, Georgia's viewed as a leader in terms of its policies. So I want to stop there. I have information about the governor's budget recommendation. I'm more than happy to share that with you. I know this is not a budget hearing, so if there's questions, I can address that, or I'm delighted to address questions about my presentation.
No, this.
I'm looking at your budget page, if I may.
Mhm.
Historically, in the early years, your money was lottery money, substantially lottery money. Of the $33 million that your budget is set out right now, is any of that lottery money today?
No. There were lottery dollars in fiscal year 94, 5, and I think a little bit in fiscal 96. And we've not had lottery dollars in our program since that time.
So it's all state dollars, or the $33 million, is any of that federal money? Or it's all state
No,
dollars?
this is state investment that I can talk to you about how that's leveraging federal money, but the federal dollars flow directly into the universities.
I understand the leverage. And what new monies, is any new money proposed this year?
Yeah, on the sheet that's titled Fiscal Year 2007 Budget Recommendation, out of the $33.5 million, as you can see at the top, there's $5.6 million for these research commercialization programs that's in our base budget, and $1.5 million to recruit 2 more eminent scholars in the base budget. Everything else is either one-time or establishment of new program, or the bulk, of course, is the capital outlay, which for the past several years has been funded through GO bonds.
Did I understand that the new money is the first 2 items then, or did I?
The first 2 items are in base budget, continuation.
Does that mean new money, or the rest of it's new money?
The rest of it's new money. So about $7 million would be continuation, I guess, is the terminology.
Is the $21 million capital outlay the majority of the new money bonded?
The $21.5 million is all GO bonds. Now, I need to explain, the Research Alliance is sort of in a mode where, for the most part, we're new money every year. I mean, we pretty much make our case each year. If you go to the very back page, you can see graphically the level of investment over the years in the Research Alliance. And it's run anywhere generally from the mid-20s to the mid-30s, in a few years as high as 45. But we come and make our case pretty much for new money each year to fund that. There's very little of our program that would be in the base budget or in the continuation budget.
Is it in Regents, or is it a separate line?
It's all in Regents, yes. Some of it's in the Research Consortium budget class, but I think most of the cash is in the A budget, and then there's the GO bond component.
This looks like a bigger bond package than in past years. Am I not remembering that?
The past couple of years have run anywhere from, 2 years ago it was $19 million, down from what had been sort of mid-low 20s. This current year, fiscal year 06, it was recommended as $20 million by the governor. The legislature deferred a large component of GO bond funding, and that $20 million is in that mix. So right now we're at a little bit of a disadvantage in what we're trying to do.
Does that mean that, when you say delays, does that mean that your last year's $20 million is this year going to be 20 and 21 million, total 41 million?
No, the fiscal year 06 GO bond recommendation of $20 million, right now that doesn't exist. So as of today, we're taking a year off, which is not a good message to send.
Mr. Cassidy, Many of the questions I was going to ask have been answered. I appreciate that. They're on a bunch of issues. But you said that other states should be following Georgia on this. Are there other states in the Southeast, and I may have missed that do this already?
Our vice president at the Research Alliance yesterday and today is in Tallahassee, Florida, meeting with Enterprise Florida. That's their state's economic development organization. And they are just enthralled with this, and they're trying to figure out how to do it. They told her last night that they're hoping that Jeb Bush is going to announce a new Eminent Scholar program in Florida. But, we'll wait to see. North Carolina has the market share, and it really didn't come through this kind of a strategy. Research Triangle Park goes back to a real estate deal that was put together back in the 50s and 60s, and they were fortunate to recruit some big industry, and a lot developed around that. More recently, they've done some things around the edges with investing in research infrastructure in their universities. Other states are trying. Alabama tried 2 years ago to form the Alabama Research Alliance, but they could not get the business leadership involved. Mississippi had been moving in that direction until their recent challenges, likewise with Louisiana. But they're trying, but they're not getting there.
And again, you probably mentioned this. Where are you located?
Our offices are in the Hurt Building,
Okay.
downtown. We're a 4-person staff. As I mentioned, we're a 501c3, a not-for-profit organization. The operations are funded privately. No state dollars go into funding the operations of our staff. So the dollars that you all appropriate go to Board of Regents, and then we give Regents the roadmap on how those dollars go out to the universities, and then we assemble those projects out at the universities. But you get a lot of leverage out of a little 4-person organization that the private sector underwrites. And that's been the model from day one.
Thank you.
Any other question?
Criticized now, have made an investment. It built GCAP building,
It did, indeed.
and it funded this initially.
Wouldn't have been possible without it. That gave us the ramp-up that was needed at a very critical time in the state's budget when there weren't the kinds of resources that had been available beyond that.
It's good to have a little different view of history.
Yes. I want to take you back a couple of months to the Innovation Conference. At that time, one of the discussions had to do with the shortcomings in elementary school and middle school teachings in terms of challenges for middle school and elementary school students in the field of analyzing things. And at that time I mentioned maybe we should invite School Superintendent Kathy Cox to the next meeting. Have you thought of any way that, I realize this is a little lower down on the scale than what you're used to, but ways of energizing that elementary and middle school system so that we can turn out more, a higher percentage of engineers? I believe the percentage of engineers now at Georgia Tech is under 25% or something like that? Or was that across Georgia?
It could be across Georgia. I know Georgia Tech is certainly broadening its curriculum in a lot of areas beyond engineering, but it's still a very, very strong engineering institution.
And I believe Red China and India turn out, what was it, in excess of 60% of their students graduate in the fields of engineering?
Yes. Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head, and K through 12 education is several steps away from where we are at the Research Alliance, and I am by no means anything like an expert in that area. I do know this, that without children taking an interest really in the late elementary, early middle school ages in science and engineering, their chances of pursuing careers in that area do become limited from all the studies that have been done. Now, I'm of an age generation where, I grew up watching the space program, and that got me very, very interested, as it did the nation, in science and technology. I wanted to be an engineer, but I just couldn't cut the math when I was in school, so I get to work around a lot of engineers. I'm very concerned today, what is it that's going to capture the imagination of our younger people? And that is a challenge, and we're working with the Georgia Biomedical Partnership. They've laid out a plan to really engage K through 12, principally the middle school years, and many of the folks from the companies that are inside the Biomedical Partnership, they're developing a plan on how to get a dialogue going and maybe even bring some of the scientists from the companies into the classroom. Now, it's a challenge to get scientists to get down to the level to talk to kids, but we have to find ways of capturing the kids' spirit. Atlanta now hosts a thing called the FIRST competition. It's an acronym for something, but it's about robotics. Everything from little Lego kits that are robots to what we would have called an erector set when we were a kid, but now they're all robotic. And the schools are beginning to buy these programs and use them for competitions to get kids interested in engineering and science through developing their own robots. And you see this stuff on BattleBots on some of the cable networks from time to time. A number of different ways that I think educators are looking at this. It's a concern, it's a challenge. We need to be connected. We're looking at ways of getting connected, but I do need to be honest that it's somewhat off target from where we're trying to bring focus.
I understand that, and I appreciate it. It was just a little shock to my system to learn that at the Innovation Conference after coming back from the National Conference of State Legislators, where I heard Bill Gates say that the United States did not produce enough engineers for his company.
That's right. Many of our companies are going offshore now. We used to talk about just taking low-wage manufacturing jobs to China and so forth. Most of the major companies that we would think of as research intensive, I've been out to interview about a dozen of them over the past 2 years to talk about what it's going to take to form industry-university collaborations. But we can't have that conversation without them telling me about needing to go to places like China and India to find their PhDs. And they're quick to say it's not because they're a little bit less expensive. It's because they're pursuing a higher level of quality. So I think we're fortunate with some of the higher education institutions we have in this state, and there are many fine institutions across the country, but there's not enough of it today.
One last chance. Anyone want to ask another question? Mike, we do appreciate you taking the time to come this morning, and we hope to hear from you again.
Anytime. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Before we adjourn, I would like to introduce our newest representative, Ernestine Howard, who was elected to replace her late husband for the remainder of this 2005 and 2006 session. Thank you very much for being with us this morning. With that, this committee stands adjourned.